So I want you to picture this. It's 1923. You are standing on the street in New York City, and you're craning your neck to look up at a building.
Right.
And on top of that building, there is this massive 20-story radio antenna. And climbing that antenna is a man.
Sounds completely terrifying.
What is? But he gets all the way to the edge. You know, the wind is just whipping around him, and he does a handstand.
Wow.
Just suspended there, high above the concrete. And you would think, okay, this guy is some kind of professional daredevil.
You'd have to be.
But he's not. He literally did it to impress a girl.
That is wild.
His name is Edwin Howard Armstrong. And he is, well, he's the brilliant inventor who practically single-handedly created the technology that makes modern radio work.
Yeah, he really did.
But the thing is, decades later, after being locked in this incredibly brutal war with a corporate Goliath, that same man would jump to his death from a 13th floor window.
Yeah. The contrast there is just staggering. Between that, that romantic, fearless high early in his life and the totally devastating low at the end.
It really is.
And that trajectory is exactly what our stack of sources. So we've got historical archives, biographical notes, detailed records. That's what they lay out for us today. Because this is not just some dry history of wires and vacuum tubes.
Right. Definitely not.
It's the story of a brilliant, totally uncompromising mind colliding with the harsh realities of corporate monopolies, regulatory capture, and, the agonizing price of being right when incredibly powerful people want you to be wrong.
Well said. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to take you behind the invisible ways that connect our entire modern world and really uncover the human drama that forged them.
Exactly.
And to really understand the mechanics of Edwin Howard Armstrong's mind, I think we have to look at the intense isolation of his childhood in New York.
Yeah, we have to start there. His early years were really marked by this severe neurological disorder. It's called Sydenham's chorea.
Which they used to call St. Vitus's dance, right?
Right, exactly. St. Vitus's dance. It's brought on by rheumatic fever, and for Armstrong, it was bad. It left him with a lifelong physical tic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so whenever he was under stress or, just highly stimulated, this tic would act up. And because of the illness, he was actually pulled out of public school.
Really?
Yeah, he was home tutored for a couple of years.
Man, you can imagine how isolating that must be for a kid, especially a highly intelligent one.
Oh, absolutely.
So he becomes very socially withdrawn, but, and this is classic, right, that isolation channels into an incredibly intense focus on electrical and mechanical devices.
He needed an outlet.
Right. So after his family moves to Yonkers to improve his health, he builds this massive makeshift antenna tower in their backyard.
As one does.
Naturally. And he actually rigs up a bosun's chair.
Wait, like the suspended seat on a rope system?
Exactly. Just so he can hoist himself up and down the length of this giant tower, completely terrifying all his neighbors in the process.
That is such a great image. And, by the time he enrolls at Columbia University, this is in 1909, his whole approach to engineering is deeply unconventional.
I mean, he's used to hanging from a ropes course in his yard.
Exactly. He conducts his early research hanging from that tower or like up in his parents' hot attic, and he carries that hyper-practical mentality straight into the classroom.
Wasn't big on theory, was he?
Not at all. He is intensely focused on physical experimentation and almost completely indifferent to theoretical physics. He considered it detached from reality.
Yeah, his time at Columbia perfectly illustrates this. This is one of my favorite stories. He famously tricked a visiting Cornell professor into getting a severe electrical shock during an experiment.
Wait, on purpose?
Oh, yeah. The guy was the theorist he disliked, so he just, shocked him.
That's hilarious and a little terrifying.
It is. If we look at Armstrong through a modern lens, he is essentially the early 1900s equivalent of a teenage hardware hacker.
Oh,
he is the kid ignoring the standard computer science curriculum so he can build this massive liquid-cooled server farm in his bedroom just to see what the hardware can actually handle. He demanded physical proof over math.
And that rebellious, hands-on nature leads directly to his first world-changing breakthrough. And he achieves this in 1913 while he is still an undergraduate.
That's just wild to me.
Yeah. It's called the regenerative circuit. And to understand the magnitude of this, you really have to look at the state of radio at the time.
It was pretty rough, right?
It was awful. Listening to a broadcast meant putting on these incredibly heavy headphones and just straining to hear this tiny, faint, crackly signal.
Right.
Now, inventors like Lita Forrest had created the vacuum tube, specifically this thing called the 3-element grid Audion tube. but nobody truly understood the physics of how it actually functioned within a circuit.
Yeah, and so Armstrong took those temporal tubes, set up an oscillograph, and he just systematically mapped out their behavior.
You wanted to see the truth of it.
Exactly. And he discovered that if you take the radio signal and you feed a portion of it back through the vacuum tube, you achieve what we now call positive feedback.
Right. And if you've ever heard like the loud, piercing hum of a guitar amplifier placed too close to a speaker.
Oh, yeah, that awful screech.
Yeah. You have experienced the crude, chaotic version of what Armstrong was trying to harness.
Okay, that makes sense.
By carefully controlling that positive feedback loop, Armstrong pushed the vacuum tube to the absolute brink of oscillation. Instead of just passing the signal through, this specific geometry amplified the incoming radio waves hundreds of times over.
So it basically takes a whisper of a signal and turns it into a shout.
Exactly.
And this is the mechanism that makes loudspeakers possible. Suddenly, you don't need those heavy headphones. An entire room of people can just listen to a single broadcast.
It changes everything.
It does. So he patents the regenerative circuit in 1914. But, and here's where the tragedy starts.
Yeah.
This triumph triggers a 20-year nightmare.
Yeah. Enter Lee DeForest. So DeForest sees the immense value of what Armstrong has done, and he files competing patent applications.
Even though Armstrong figured out the circuit?
Right. DeForest claims he actually discovered regeneration first, and his proof is just this vague notebook entry from 1912.
Oh, man.
And this initiates this grueling legal battle that grinds all the way to the Supreme Court. And ultimately, the court rules in favor of DeForest.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this. So the legal system essentially ruled against the laws of physics. They sided with the man who invented the component, even though he literally didn't understand the circuit geometry required to make it do the thing he claimed to have invented.
Yes, that is exactly what happened.
That is infuriating.
It was, and the scientific community completely recognized the absurdity of the ruling. I mean, the Institute of Radio Engineers had already awarded Armstrong their very first Medal of Honor for the regenerative circuit.
Oh, real?
Yeah. And when Armstrong tried to return the medal after the Supreme Court decision, because he felt he'd been legally stripped of the title, the Institute flatly refused to take it back.
Wow, good for them.
Yeah, they issued a statement affirming that, regardless of the legal maneuvering, they knew he was the true inventor.
But still, getting burned by the courts like that, it changed him. He realized his next invention couldn't just be a lab experiment. It had to be this piece of undeniable, battle-tested hardware.
Right.
And he got the ultimate testing ground when World War I broke out. He actually went to Paris as a major in the Army Signal Corps to develop radio communications for the Allies.
Talk about high stakes.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And in that environment, he invents his second masterpiece, the superheterodyne receiver.
Which is such a massive leap, because the superheterodyne solved a huge bottleneck in early radio.
Okay, break that down for us.
So early vacuum tubes had these severe parasitic capacitance limits. Basically, they simply could not amplify high-frequency signals reliably. Tuning into a specific high-frequency military transmission was incredibly difficult. It was a mess. Armstrong's solution was an elegant workaround. His circuit took the incoming high-frequency radio signal, and it actually mixed it with a locally generated frequency right inside the radio itself.
Okay, so it's sort of like taking a chaotic, ultra-fast conveyor belt of high-frequency data and mechanically gearing it down to a stable, intermediate walking pace.
That is a perfect analogy, actually, yes. By mixing the signals to create a lower intermediate frequency, the rest of the radio circuitry could easily amplify and process the data.
That is brilliant.
It was. This architecture made radios vastly more sensitive to weak signals and incredibly selective. You could tune into one specific station without hearing three others overlapping it.
Which was a huge problem back then.
Oh, massive. The superheterodyne circuit was such a fundamental leap in signal processing that it remains the core architecture in almost all radio, television, and radar equipment today.
Still today. That's incredible. And this invention is what brings him into the orbit of David Sarnoff, right? The general manager of RCA.
Yes, the Radio Corporation of America.
Right. So Armstrong returns from the war, demonstrates the superheterodyne to Sarnoff, and Sarnoff is just completely blown away. He immediately halts millions of dollars in existing manufacturing orders to pivot the entire company toward Armstrong's technology.
Because Sarnoff recognized that this was the foundation for consumer broadcasting. I mean, RCA introduces the radiola sets based on this tech in 1924, and they are a massive commercial success.
Oh, I've seen pictures of those.
Yeah. The radiola essentially turned Armstrong's math into RCA's cash flow, generating its unprecedented profits for the corporation.
And Armstrong gets incredibly wealthy, right? He becomes RCA's largest shareholder overnight.
He does.
And get this, during this period, while he's prepping for yet another patent dispute, he accidentally discovers a way to push his old regenerative circuit even further, creating super regeneration, which he then sells to RCA for another massive payout of cash and stock.
He just couldn't miss at this point.
No. His financial worries just vanish. She buys a luxury Hispano-Suiza motor car. He drives it down to Palm Beach, and he is just living the life of a tech mogul.
And this is the era of the famous handstand, right?
Yes. In 1923, he climbs that 20-story transmission tower, performs the stunt, takes a photo, and gives it to David Sarnoff's secretary, Mary McInnes.
Unbelievable.
And it worked. They marry later that year, and for a wedding gift, he builds her the world's first portable superheterodyne radio.
That is so nerdy and so romantic at the same time.
It's the 1920s equivalent of a modern indie app developer creating a flawless piece of software, getting bought out by big tech for billions, and then marrying the CEO's assistant.
Which is perfect.
Until it isn't.
Yeah.
Because Armstrong's relentless obsession with perfection would soon threaten the very empire he just helped build.
Right, because the boom of 1920s radio was hindered by one massive fundamental flaw: static. If there was a thunderstorm 50 miles away, or honestly, if someone simply turned on an electrical appliance nearby, the radio broadcast would just be drowned out by crackles and pops.
Because early radio utilized AM, right?
Yeah.
Amplitude modulation.
Yes.
The technology works by varying the overall strength or amplitude of the radio wave to encode the audio signal. But the problem is that lightning strikes and electrical motors also emit electromagnetic waves that manifest as massive amplitude spikes.
Exactly.
So your AM receiver cannot differentiate between the amplitude variations of, say, a symphony and the amplitude spikes of a lightning storm. It just plays both simultaneously.
It was a nightmare. And the brightest minds in engineering were trying to solve this. John Renshaw Carson, he was a prominent mathematician at AT&T, he published this detailed mathematical analysis concluding that varying the frequency of the wave instead of the amplitude, which would be FM, would not eliminate static.
So the accepted math of the day basically said FM was a dead end.
Completely a dead end. But Armstrong, holding true to his Columbia days, he just rejects the theoretical math in favor of physical experimentation.
Of course he does.
Working in absolute secret in the basement of Columbia's Philosophy Hall, he builds the circuits to test FM himself. And what he discovers completely shatters the consensus. He invents wideband FM.
Wow. How did he pull that off?
He realized that if you make the deviations in the frequency much larger than anyone thought necessary, you fundamentally change how the receiver processes the signal.
Yeah.
Because the audio information in an FM broadcast is entirely encoded in the timing of the frequency variations, the receiver doesn't need to read the amplitude at all.
Okay, I see. This allows the FM receiver to employ components called clippers, right?
Yes.
The circuit literally slices off the tops and bottoms of the incoming radio wave. It just destroys all of those amplitude spikes caused by atmospheric static, leaving only the pure, clean frequency signal.
Exactly. And the audio quality was unheard of. In 1934, Armstrong sets up a field test from an RCA lab on the 85th floor of the Empire State Building. He broadcasts a wideband FM signal 80 miles away to a receiver in Long Island.
80 miles.
And the audio was crystal clear. It sounded like the musicians were playing in the exact same room.
That is incredible. And naturally, he takes this triumph straight to his friend and partner, David Sarnoff. But, and here's the crazy part, RCA's reaction was completely cold.
Ice cold.
Instead of embracing the technology, they actually tell Armstrong to remove his equipment from the Empire State Building.
Which is just crazy.
So wait, I have to ask, why would Sarnoff, who was a visionary, who championed Armstrong before, actively ignore a clearly superior audio technology? Is it just corporate greed?
Well, if you look at RCA's balance sheet at the time, their reaction makes perfect, ruthless business sense.
How so?
Sarnoff had built RCA using Armstrong's earlier inventions, sure, but they had just spent millions building out a massive AM network infrastructure, including the NBC broadcasting monopoly.
Oh, I see.
Plus, Sarnoff was pivoting RCA's research budget entirely toward this new invention, television.
So FM wasn't an incremental upgrade, it was a wrecking ball.
It is the textbook definition of the innovator's dilemma. If RCA championed FM, their entire network of AM transmitters and the millions of existing AM radios sitting in consumers' living rooms would become obsolete overnight.
Embracing superior technology meant cannibalizing their own empire.
Exactly. So they shut him out.
Rejected by his friend and business partner, Armstrong realizes no one is going to hand him a victory. So he decides to go rogue. He's going to force the infrastructure into existence himself.
He was not a guy to back down.
Not at all. He cashes in a massive portion of his own wealth to build a 400-foot transmission tower in Alpine, New Jersey. And he systematically proves that FM could broadcast high-fidelity audio over 100 miles, which totally shattered the prevailing myth that high-frequency waves couldn't travel past the horizon.
And he rallies independent radio manufacturers too, right? Like Zenith and General Electric.
Yeah. Momentum builds rapidly, and by 1940, his lobbying actually forces the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, to establish an official FM broadcast band between 42 and 50 megahertz.
So a thriving independent FM market is born.
Yes. And when World War II breaks out, Armstrong suspends his commercial efforts and gives the U.S. military royalty-free use of all his patents.
Which is incredibly patriotic of him.
Definitely. And his advancements in FM radar were so precise that after the war, under Project Diana, the Army successfully used his modified equipment to bounce radar signals off the moon.
In 1946, off the moon.
Just incredible.
But, while Armstrong was helping win the war, RCA and the established AM broadcasters were meticulously plotting to win the peace.
Right, the corporate sabotage.
Yeah. Following WWWII, RCA aggressively lobbies the FCC to move the entire FM broadcast band out of the 42 to 50 megahertz range, pushing it way up to the 88 to 108 megahertz spectrum.
Which is the band we still use today, right?
Exactly. But RCA masks this corporate sabotage under the guise of technical necessity. They argued that anomalous weather conditions, specifically ionospheric skip, where atmospheric changes occasionally allow signals to bounce over long distances, cause stations on the lower band to overlap and interfere with one another.
Wow. And Armstrong obviously fiercely opposes that.
Oh, he fought it with everything he had. He understood the physics better than any of the lobbyists. He produced data showing the interference was totally negligible and the band shift was entirely unnecessary.
But regulatory capture proved stronger than scientific data.
It did. The FCC sided with RCA and mandated the shift.
The sheer ruthlessness of this move, it wasn't just a technical adjustment, it was a calculated regulatory assassination. Because overnight, the 395,000 FM radios that the public had already purchased for the original band became useless, static-filled boxes.
They were bricked.
Yeah. By forcing the entire industry to start over from scratch, the FCC effectively destroyed the existing hardware, bled Armstrong's independent network dry, and bought RCA the time they needed to dominate the new spectrum.
And the destruction of his network was compounded by blatant patent infringement. Multiple large corporations began manufacturing new FM equipment without paying Armstrong royalties.
Just stealing it, basically.
Well, utilizing minor circuit variations so they could claim they'd invented non-infringing systems.
It's just so shady. And back in 1940, RCA had actually offered Armstrong $1 million for a non-exclusive, royalty-free license to use his FM patents.
And he turned it down.
He refused the lowball offer out of sheer principle. He felt this intense loyalty to the smaller, independent companies who had supported him early on and were faithfully paying their 2% royalties.
Taking a sweetheart deal from RCA would have legitimized their monopoly.
Exactly. But pushed into a corner, Armstrong finally sues RCA and NBC in 1948 for patent infringement. He formally accuses them of deliberately conspiring to impair the value of his invention.
And this lawsuit becomes an all-consuming black hole.
Yeah. A colleague later estimated that Armstrong spent 90% of his time trapped in litigation against RCA's army of lawyers.
90%.
As the years dragged on, his original patents began to expire, cutting off his royalty income. His massive personal wealth drained rapidly.
And the physical and psychological toll was just horrifying. Remember that childhood headache from his bout with St. Vitus's dance?
Oh, yeah.
It worsened dramatically under the immense stress. His isolation returned, but this time it mutated into severe paranoia. During one particularly dark episode, he actually demanded his stomach be pumped.
Oh my God, why?
Because he was convinced someone was trying to poison his food. He was systematically pushed to the absolute brink of his sanity.
That is so tragic. And the breaking point finally arrived in November of 1953. Exhausted and completely out of capital, Armstrong approached his wife, Marion, the woman he had scaled a 20-story tower for, and asked her to release funds for a protected retirement account they had established in her name.
He needed the money to keep funding the endless legal war against RCA.
Right. But Marion refused. She'd watched this litigation consume his brilliant mind and destroy their lives. She begged him to accept a settlement, to just walk away from the crusade and find some measure of peace.
And he just couldn't do it.
No. Enraged by what he perceived as the ultimate betrayal from his closest ally, Armstrong struck her on the arm with a fireplace poker.
Oh, wow.
Terrified, Marion fled the apartment to stay with her sister, and she would never see him alive again.
3 months later, on the night of January 31st, 1954, a completely exhausted Edwin Howard Armstrong sits down in his apartment and writes a 2-page suicide note to Marion.
Yeah.
In it, he expresses his profound regret for hurting her. He calls her the dearest thing in his life. And he concludes the letter with the words, "God keep you and Lord have mercy on my soul."
And then he puts on his overcoat, his hat, and his gloves. And the man who had essentially built the nervous system of the 20th century stepped out the window of his 13th floor apartment.
The tragic irony is almost too heavy to process. An engineer who dedicated his entire existence to improving human connection, to ensuring that voices could travel clearly and perfectly across vast distances, dies completely alienated and isolated from the person he loved most in the world.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But the narrative doesn't end on the pavement, because Marion Armstrong refused to let RCA bury his legacy.
She fought back.
She did. Following his death, she took control of his estate. And by December of 1954, she secured a settlement from RCA for roughly $1 million.
Wow, good for her.
And she didn't stop there. She utilized that capital to launch a relentless counteroffensive.
Over the next 13 years, Marion Armstrong fought and won patent infringement suits against the rest of the major electronics manufacturers.
13 years of lawsuits.
Yeah. She methodically dismantled their claims of non-infringing systems, formally and legally establishing her late husband as the indisputable inventor of FM radio.
His technological legacy is the invisible architecture of our modern reality. In the 1960s, the high-fidelity clarity of FM finally overtook AM in global popularity. When NASA sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon, they relied on Armstrong's FM system to transmit their voices back to Earth.
And that superheterodyne circuit he invented in a Paris lab during World War I, it's still sitting inside almost every single piece of communication equipment you use today.
He forced the future into existence, maintaining his absolute commitment to scientific truth, even when the most powerful corporate and regulatory forces of his era conspired to crush him.
You really did.
So, as you process the staggering cost of Armstrong's uncompromising brilliance, I want you to consider a broader paradigm. When you look at the landscape of modern technology, particularly, say, the open-source software movement, it's hard not to see it as a direct immune response to the very type of corporate patent strangulation that destroyed Armstrong.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
Right. Millions of developers today freely share their code, explicitly designing licenses to prevent any single monopoly from locking away superior technology or bricking innovation through legal attrition. It really forces us to ask, in the history of technology, how many world-changing ideas were successfully buried in the decades before we figured out how to protect the inventors from the monopolies?
Probably more than we'll ever know.
And what kind of relentless, agonizing obsession does it take for a single mind to look at an impossibly high 20-story drop and decide to do a handstand anyway?